Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to a beautiful Thursday evening or afternoon or morning, depending on wherever you happen to be around Grandmother Earth. We are delighted to have you with us tonight listening in. The chat room is now open at Spreaker.com. The link has been posted at Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing, our page there on Facebook. So come on in. The water is warm, and it's always good to be in the chat room. I'm delighted tonight to introduce to you two of my favorite human beings, who are pretty special people on many levels. The first of whom is Nicole LaFanti-Fix. She is a therapist, an LMSW at Eastern Door Counseling here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And also David Cad Sturken, who is a pediatric nurse practitioner and a certified death midwife. And myself, hey Brenda, how are you? Good to have you in the chat room tonight already. And everyone else, come on in, file in. Tonight is the premiere of our show, Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing. And of course, we are always open for questions and thoughts and discussion, because that's what we do here on these podcasts at Temple Within. Good evening, Nicole.
Good evening.
Hey, David. How are you, Cad?
I'm doing great, thanks.
This evening, we're bringing up a topic that's wildly popular right now. It's a buzz all across at least the United States, that's for sure. And that is the topic of ancestry. And we're getting ready to head into that time of the year where those ancestry kits where you spit in the bottle and send it off and get your results of your DNA, they're going on sale. And so people are beginning already to think about, do I or don't I? And so it's pretty timely that we're beginning this show right now. Nicole, in our meeting before the show, everyone, just so that you know, before we came on the show tonight, the three of us got together for a discussion about, where do we go with the show tonight? And there was something that Nicole said that really struck a chord with me and Cad, and it was, in the U.S., we are disconnected from our ancestors. Many of us, of course not all of us, but many of us are disconnected. What do you mean by that, Nicole?
I think that a lot has gotten lost through, either coming to the United States or through, the limited time we've had here. We've gotten lost to some of our roots, which, most of us are not Native American, and those who are connected more to the roots here, but just getting lost from where we come from, who we are. A lot of us are a big mixture, and we don't even know the vast majority of where we come from, and so the traditions change, the families change. We've got a lot of families that are estranged or no longer just connected as we once were. And I'm thinking of even like living as a community, more community based, where we're more individualized here in the U.S. So I guess I mean a vast things by that. That's kind of what comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Cad, in addition to every other thing that you do, you're also a shamanic practitioner. Yeah. And how do you feel about what Nicole just expressed about being disconnected from ancestors and the importance of being connected to ancestors?
Yeah, I think Nicole made some very good points. One of the challenges I think that we have as white, mostly European people that came over to this country was that many of us are not rooted in the place where our ancestors were born. And so we have that disconnect on a physical level, but I think also sometimes on an emotional level. Sometimes we may know our ancestors, but we don't really connect with them because perhaps we don't like the way they behaved, Perhaps we don't like maybe who they were as a person. But, I think our connection to our ancestors does not have to be based on their behavior. We can still be connected to them because they are the ones who brought us here. They are our blood, they are our bones. And so I think that that disconnection can it may be more difficult for us to actually have that connection because we're not physically where many of our ancestors are, but I think we can still learn about them and try and develop a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm. Spiritually speaking, being connected
Yes.
to our ancestors can be just as enriching as being physically present with them. And I love what you brought up about the history of ancestors, whether it's one person or a group of people. We may not be enamored or particularly proud of a particular segment of history with regard to who our ancestors are, but not acknowledging that they exist doesn't mean that they didn't exist.
Correct.
And it doesn't mean that they're not in our blood and in our bones. And, interestingly, and yet not, you work at a major hospital and you deal with blood every day, literally. And so we know that ancestral traits, ancestral traumas, experiences, joys, all of those things carry on in our DNA.
Yes.
And I think it's important to be connected to that. And I believe that finally here in the United States, we're coming to understand perhaps the importance of that. I've always felt that one of the reasons that people here in the United States are so enamored with Native American spirituality and Native Americans is because they are still connected to the soil of their people, to the stories, the songs, the legends. And for those of us that are the children and grandchildren and ancestors of those who arrived here, maybe hundreds of years ago or maybe just last week, there can be a loss of a feeling of being connected. How do you feel about that, Nicole?
Oh, I think you just hit it so spot on because, a lot of our relatives that come over here are they may be escaping, they may be fleeing, they may be pursuing a dream, a better life. And what happens, as any transition is we, realize that there is a mourning as you, arrive. There's a mourning for what you lose. And yeah, you're gaining things too, but that mourning is that symbolic, death in a way of the old.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And one of the unique things about being here in the United States is many of our ancestors, when they got to Ellis Island or whatever point of entry they may have come through, they sometimes changed their history on the spot.
Yeah.
And people are finding out that maybe they really weren't Norwegian. Maybe they were Irish. And there's a fascination with that. And sometimes the answering of questions of, well, no wonder I have a fondness for or a propensity toward one thing or another. I believe that our ancestors walk very closely with us from the world of spirit, let alone in our blood and bones and our psyche. Kat, how do you feel about the idea that our ancestors, even those that have been departed for a very long time, that they walk with us? That they are with us in many ways, in our memories and in our emotions and in our likes and our dislikes, but spiritually, they walk behind us, as they say.
Yeah, I think even though we may not always really cognitively realize it, I think that it just happens. Whether we are aware that those who have passed on are walking beside us or or are with us every day, they are with us. I think as we become more and more cognizant of that and more aware of the fact that they are and ways that we can actually work to develop that ongoing relationship. I think one of the challenges that we sometimes have is that when our ancestors die, we have, many of us who've been brought up in the church have this idea that they go up to heaven and, they're there. And the thought of having an ongoing relationship with them and the fact that they are here with us every day is kind of a thought that we don't have, because that's kind of been educated out of us. So I think really trying to re-educate ourselves and continuing to have that relationship. And what does that mean to have a relationship with an ancestor that's gone on before us? So I think it's a very beautiful relationship that can continue even after someone's gone.
I like that a lot. Nicole, I'm glad I get to kind of be the moderator tonight for the three of us, because I've got so many questions that I want to pick your brains about. Right now, there is a boom in an industry with many labels, 23andMe, Ancestry, and people are filing in and spitting in the vials and sending them in record numbers. Nicole, as a licensed therapist, and you work with so many amazing people who come to you for help, what do you feel is the impetus for somebody to want to go through that process, to put their DNA out there, and to receive a report of people who are connected to you, or to learn about the land that your people came from, or the lands that your people came from? What do you feel is the source of that desire?
Well, I imagine it's a multitude of things, but what comes to mind for me most is, that back to that feeling of disconnect and wanting to feel more connected and having this longing, this void that, you don't really know how to place it, but you know that there's more there, and curiosity and, wanting more concrete answers than we perhaps have, oftentimes have.
Mm-hmm. I was struck with something last week. As you know, my adoptive brother, Guy Dullknife, passed away. And so Todd and I flew out to South Dakota to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And it really struck me during one of the ceremonies. Here is my older brother wrapped in a very traditional way in a buffalo robe. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a full-size buffalo skin with the fur on it. And he was on a platform, wrapped in this amazing buffalo robe inside a teepee on a scaffold. And when the time came for him to go into the ground, he was placed into the ground of all of his ancestors. All of his ancestors. Not in a casket, not in a cement vault, but literally wrapped in the relative known as Tatanka Oyate, the Buffalo Nation, in the very dirt that his ancestors have always known as their home. And it struck me as profoundly beautiful, that connection to the land, to the songs that were being sung, to the cedar, to the sage that was being burned, and to all of the prayers that were going on. And I've always felt that our souls long for that. Yeah. How do you feel about that, Cad?
Absolutely. It's interesting. So one of the things about me that Denise didn't mention is that I'm adopted. And one of the challenges I think that we as adopted children sometimes have is that we may not know our blood ancestors. Fortunately, I have been able to find out, and actually some of it was through ancestry, but some of it was through some other circumstances. I met my biological mother, and my biological father has died, but my biological father was Irish, and just this year I was able to go to Ireland. And going there and stepping on the land was a very... it was an amazing experience for me. And I don't know how to describe it other than just, I remember we were not even there probably for 30 minutes, but we had gone to the stone circle and I had the opportunity to just lay on the earth and to think about, as you said, that's the land of my ancestors. That's, the air there is the air they breathed. The soil is probably the bones of my ancestors, and just it's knowing that experience. I think one of the things you mentioned that is so important is I don't know the songs of my ancestors. I don't know a lot of the mythology, and now that's something that I'm trying to delve into, because I think it's so important. I think it's important to know where we came from, and I feel like I have a connection to my adoptive ancestors as well as my biological ancestors.
In what way, Kat?
So I think, one of the things that we as adopted children, even though they are not our blood, I believe that they are still part of who we are. Mm-hmm. And so I firmly believe that my ancestors are extended beyond my biological family, that they are the ancestors that I have as a part of my adoptive family are just as important for me to understand, to know where they were from, to connect with on a spiritual level as well as a physical level. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's interesting. I feel like I've had an opportunity to expand my ancestral family, and which is kind of fun in many ways, because the opportunity to just learn more about the various places they came from and the various cultures they came from.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Thank you for sharing that, Kat.
Sure.
I know, Nicole, that you have a love of all things Francais.
Yes.
And where does that come from?
I've had it since I was a little child, and allegedly we do not have any French in our blood, but I'm guessing that when I get my Ancestry.com done, there could very well be some French in my blood. Because it's just, and when I've been there, I mean, it was one of my undergrad majors was French, and studied there, spent a few summers there. It just feels like home. Mm-hmm. You just, the language, the culture, the people, the land, everything. And so, to feel that connection and to feel that homecoming in a way, it's like soul fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. I like that, soul fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
There was something that you said before the show that really struck me. And we were talking about this influx of people really wanting to know, to shake the skeletons out of the family closet and come to terms with their ancestry, their ancestors, their stories, the real stories. And you mentioned two words that struck me: chronic emptiness. Will you talk about chronic emptiness for a moment, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of people who are starving for something they don't even know what it is, who feel lost and who feel unfulfilled, and but yet don't know how to fill that part of themselves up with. And so, it's this void, this chronic emptiness, and we have these rampant rates of these people experiencing symptoms of depression, which that's actually a symptom of depression. And so, you think of the depression and the anxiety that oftentimes are always going hand in hand, and the sadness and the unworthiness that goes along with it. So how that shows up, oftentimes there's trauma related, but not always. But then you've got the addiction component and things where people are trying to fill them up with some kind of love, and it's not always done in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. So, seeing how that may factor into this whole place of disconnect. And, as human beings, we're hardwired for relationships and connection and belongingness. And so if we don't really know how we belong or where we belong, or there's risks along the way, we're going to result in these risks of, not knowing and feeling lost.
And sometimes I believe, and both of you please weigh in on this, sometimes I feel that our blood in our bones can often feel a melancholy that isn't necessarily ours, but perhaps it's the melancholy of one of our ancestors who, for whatever reason, had to leave their homeland, whether it was war, whether it was famine, whether it was slavery. But they were taken from their homeland. And I believe for myself that we can often in our blood, in our bones, carry on those feelings of sadness, melancholy, anxiety about leaving, even though it wasn't ours. I think that our blood in our bones literally carries the memories, good, bad, and indifferent, of our ancestors. How do you feel about that, Cad?
I absolutely agree. I think, one of the things that's, I think as I've talked with people, one of the things that people will say is, I have this issue that is happening in my life, and it continues to just kind of, it's always happening, and I can't figure out why. I mean, I don't know any reason why I should feel this way or experience what I'm experiencing. So say like the example, addiction. We know that can carry on from history of a family member, and so some of us carry that in our blood, in our bones, because alcoholism, addiction, because of some of the things that have happened to our ancestors. One of the things that I was really struck by when I went to Ireland, Amanda Murphy, who was our who led our group, she was talking about some of the folks that were having to leave because of the famine, and at that time they had food in their pockets. One of the things that she mentioned was that people, as they were getting on the boats, actually took the food out of their pockets and picked up handfuls of the soil from Ireland, and put it in their pockets. That's how important the land and where they came from was. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that we can ever diminish how important the place where you came from was. Just stepping on that soil sometimes is enough to kind of bring up memories and things like that. But definitely, I feel like we carry the sorrow. We can carry physical things that may have happened to our ancestors, and we might not even know have happened. We can carry it in our body as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I experienced the first time that I went down south to meet my cousin Corey, who is my mother's first cousin, my biological mother's first cousin. She gave me an absolute treasure. And it brings me to a place of absolute silence when I think about it. She gave me something that my great-grandfather put in his pocket that was so important to him leaving the Netherlands. And it was his treasure, and he put it in his pocket and carried it with him to this land. And the irony that it ended up with me, the beauty of that, it holds a very sacred place here in my home. And every time I touch it and I look at it, and it has a beautiful a graphic of the Netherlands on it. And so it was something that connected him to people and places that have always been for that family. And so the treasures that we bring from the old country to this country, some of them have been lost, some of them have been preserved by people and families. I think of Kelly Spencer because she's got so many treasures in her home and she wants to pass them down through generations. And I'm happy that I now have something that I can pass down. Nicole, when we're talking about this subject of being connected to land, being connected to the love or the ancientness of who we are, do you feel that we're also connecting to literally who we are by having these items or the stories or the song? We're really honoring our own self in some way.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Because it's, and what they're finding out through the field of epigenetics and is that the DNA does live on in our body. And, they've studied the effects of, kids who are born to those who have post-traumatic stress disorder and how, it lives in the DNA still, that they can be, hypervigilant, hyper alert, and have that startle reaction, just as though someone who's experienced the traumatic event themselves. So it's fascinating, how we're finding what our souls have already kind of known is that, our ancestors are truly living within us, and yes. So are their memories, their thoughts, their feelings. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Tracy Civic is saying that she believes that as well. The fear that her ancestors experienced during the Second World War is something that she still feels in her blood and her bones. The anxiety is there. Anxiety galore in the males and the females, both in her family, going back to some very traumatic events in the Second World War.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you think about, just adding even more, just the component of, knowing that at least a little girl, when she is developing in utero and her mom's, womb, has within her at 5 months of being 5 months pregnant, that baby has within her the cells for her eggs and her future children. So as women, we're in our grandmother's bodies, essentially. Yeah. So
that's just amazing to me.
So fascinating.
It is fascinating. It's absolutely glorious. The chat room is packed. And if any of you, and thank you, by the way, all of you for being listeners, and also for those of you that are in the chat room, there are so many of you, thank you. If you have any questions or comments, please do share, because that's what we're here for, is to talk about a pretty amazing topic that's pretty hot right now, and I think is going to be for a very long time in the United States, because we are truly a melting pot, more so than most other countries around the world. And this feeling, the feelings of emptiness and loneliness that have extrapolated into other ways of finding love, I think we've discovered just doesn't work. And so we're going back to our roots. And I feel like we need to be prepared for that in some ways. We talked about that earlier tonight. This is the time of the year where people, for Christmas will give the gift of a DNA kit. And I believe we have to sometimes be really ready for what it is that we're going to discover. How do you feel about that, Kat?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's kind of really opening up doors that some folks are ready, willing, and able to walk through. But on the other end of it, they may find out information that the person on the other end is not really willing to share. And so, I think there's challenges related to it. A lot of the issues related to giving up on a child for adoption. For whatever circumstance, sometimes there's shame associated with that. Sometimes there's, just because of the culture and stuff that back in the, 50s and 60s and 70s, people were sent away. Mm-hmm. And sometimes siblings were split up, and so I think we're, as you said, things are being uncovered from the closet that have create some discomfort for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think trying to honor that, but also I think as well is it's liberating for many folks to actually be able to find this information out.
Mm-hmm.
When I was adopted, the adoptions were all closed.
Right.
And now this information, people being able to have access to DNA is opening up a lot of that information for adoptees to find a parent that maybe they wouldn't have been able to find because of the closed adoption. So there's opportunities. There's a lot of joyous things that have happened, but I think there's also a lot of things that can happen that may be difficult for people. So it's kind of trying to bring balance to that.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that, Nicole, as a therapist, being prepared for what you may find on Ancestry or 23andMe that maybe you hadn't bargained for or thought of?
Right. I mean, there's definitely, I think, needs to be a preparation of some sort of knowing that, you may find things that are surprising and a way to manage that. Because there has to be an emotional readiness to explore some of these issues, because you may find things that were secret or hidden in the family. And, I've heard of several people, another person I know who's adopted, found out that she has all of these siblings she never knew about, and they never knew about her. So then the Ancestry.com brings them together. So how do you do that when you show up as, oh, wow, we have a sister who was given up by our parents 67 years ago or longer.
Yeah.
So that's a game changer as far as, how your life is and what you're prepared for and how it's going to be different. So just going in a way with, making sure that you've got supports to talk to and being open to being able to talk about it and deal with what may come up. That's surprising. Well,
yeah. My cousin Vicky King, who is one of the funniest human beings I know. She's absolutely funny. Well, she put a meme on Facebook and prefaced it with, I think this has already happened. And I almost spit my coffee out yesterday morning when I read this. On her meme, it says, "Get your relatives speaking to one another again by sending a heartfelt Christmas card with a picture of your family with an extra child nobody knows."
Yes.
I read that and she said, "I think this happened already." And we can all laugh about it because it's been a wonderful experience, but it isn't always that case for everybody. And I know that there are probably a lot of nervous people out there right now hoping that their kids don't do the kit or their grandkids don't do that kit, because they might find out that they're from one origin rather than another. Some people have built up a pride about being related to a certain country or culture, only, for everyone to find out there's not any of that really in the DNA, that it's all something else. So there are lots of surprises, and it's just smart to be really prepared. It was one of the things Todd and I talked about. What if, Dana, when you do this kit, somebody reaches out to you, what are you going to do? And I could honestly say to him, I don't know. I will have to wait until it happens.
Yeah.
And
but at least knowing it was a possibility, right?
Absolutely.
And then knowing, that you'll handle it, you'll figure it out. But
Yeah. Holly Hagan is saying something in the chat I think is quite beautiful. She says, "I worked in refugee resettlement with people from Bosnia and learned how important it is to ask questions and listen to their stories. It helped them to integrate into their new home while keeping their culture alive." I feel that's so important. I know you do too, Cad.
Yep, absolutely. One of the things I like about summers in Grand Rapids is that they have all the festivals downtown for the various people of various backgrounds, the Polish festivals, the just for a lot of various cultures, which I think is very enriching because it's honoring that culture and also exposing other people to the culture, and some of the the beliefs or whatever. But I think I actually love those types of experiences because we can pretty easily get caught up in just kind of our own ideas of who we are and things like that, rather than exposing ourselves to other things. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel as though it's nurturing to have things around our home that can remind us of a time and a place or a feeling, or having grandma's treasures around or grandpa's treasures around gives us a sense of home. And I feel as though when we don't have a sense of home, that there are consequences for that as well. A sense of home, of safety, that a sense of belonging can bring. And I'm not negating the fact that some people really don't want to be connected to that. And that's okay too. So we're not negating on this show that some people have zero interest in buying a kilt. When we returned from Atlanta a few weeks back, Todd and I stopped at Atlanta Kilts and, had him custom fitted for a Clan Somerville kilt.
Wow.
Because his connection to his Scottish ancestors is very important to him. And frankly, he looks really good in a kilt. So I'm happy too. So, there we are trying on kilts and, showing off his Celtic tattoo work and all that good stuff. But for those that do, Tracy, this is perfect. Tracy Civic is making a comment. I wonder if it's our generation that has explored healing through love and been brave enough to dive even deeper into the core of the pain.
Yeah.
Nicole?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think we are at a place where people want a deeper level of healing. I have a lot of clients who talk about, the trauma in their family and how they want it to stop with them. Mm-hmm. And and they don't want to pass it on to their kids, which is traumatic too. Mm-hmm. So just, that deeper level of wanting to heal not only oneself, mm-hmm. ourselves, but then, knowing that we're healing generations behind us and generations in front of us, and the impact that has on our family system and, our communities and the world. And so it is a big ripple effect. And, and seeing that so common right now.
And it's not always something that everybody in the family is going to embrace, is it, Cad?
No. And, I think Tracy's point is really well taken. Before the show, we were talking about what is it that, why is it that we seem to have a little more openness to embracing, our ancestors and the ancestral pain than, generations before us where, things were hidden. If you had a child out of wedlock, you, again, were sent away, or we didn't talk about those things. We really kind of tried to keep that stuff more hidden. And it seems now like families are talking a little bit more, and some of this, or maybe not necessarily, but stuff is coming to the surface. Mm-hmm. And I think it's good in many ways because it's allowing us to look at it and to say, as Nicole very well said, this is going to stop with me. I'm not going to continue to let this type of behavior continue, or mm-hmm. Those types of beliefs. So mm-hmm. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and being ready for the truth. Not everybody is ready. Everybody's right where they are. And one of the things I love about my cousin Donna, who's in the chat room, Donna King. And I still have the voicemail from your first phone call to me, Donna. But Donna was the first member of the King family that I physically met. And at one point when we were sitting there at Cracker Barrel on the front porch in the rocker there in the south of Georgia, meeting for the first time, she mentioned to me that the family hadn't been together since my father had died in 2001. And I asked her the question, well, how did my daddy die?
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she said, she just wasn't comfortable in telling me.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I'm okay with the truth. Tell me the truth. I didn't come all this way not to have the truth. And that's why we're here. It's for the truth. I already, told myself that I needed to be ready for whatever was going to come down the pipe.
Yeah.
From meeting them, from meeting Corey and Johnny. I needed to be ready and make sure that I was ready for whatever information was going to come along. And at some point, everybody, when you decide to dive into your ancestral memories, the good ones, the bad ones, the traumatic ones, the hilarious ones, the brutal ones, not everybody in your circle of friends and family is going to embrace your quest. So there are times when you go out on the quest very much alone, with only your ancestors standing behind you. And for me, I feel a lot of people experience that. Don't you, Nicole?
Yeah, not everyone is accepting. And so making sure that you have some kind of support system is essential. And, whether it be 1 to 2 people that are supportive, that you can talk to, that, is going to be really important, just to make sure that you've got, someone that is there holding your hand in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Lately, there's been a new series on TV called Taken at Birth. And I've believed for the past 20 years that I happen to be one of the children that Dr. Hicks down there at the Georgia-Tennessee border delivered. And many of those mothers were told that their children died after birth. Some of them were told that their children were stillborn. There were many things that happened with Dr. Hicks during that time. And this evening before the show, my cousin Danielle called me about something not related to any of it. And, Kat, as you know, I've decided that for my 57th birthday, which will be on Saturday, that I'm finally going to get to the root of my real birth certificate and the real story. And yeah. Danielle and I were talking about that. And personally, to Tracy's point, there's so much healing that happens in our immediate circumstance. I believe that our ancestors are joyous when we dig in and we do the work, because I believe in the 7th generation teachings that we don't do anything in a vacuum. And I believe that for some of us, we are the voice and the healing for our ancestors who had no voice, who weren't able to do this work, who didn't have access that we currently have. How do you feel about that, Cad?
Yeah, one of the things I think that through some of the studying things that I've done and some things that I participated in is I believe that we heal our ancestors as we heal ourselves. I think sometimes folks get caught up in the idea that we have to heal our ancestors. There's something we have to do to provide that healing. And I think personally that is just as we heal ourselves, our ancestors are healed. And I also think that that our ancestors have some responsibility on the other side. Mm-hmm. To do their own healing.
Yes.
That we can't take responsibility for all of that. And you and I participated in a class. There's a nice book written by a gentleman whose name is Daniel Four called Ancestral Medicine, and he talks about that. He talks about that we as individuals are not responsible for our ancestors' healing, that they have to do that on the other side, but as we heal ourselves, they also heal. So I think we just keep healing ourselves, and they feel the benefits of that.
Mm-hmm. Right, and thank you for saying that, because a lot of people feel as though they need to do all of the work on behalf of their ancestors. And the truth is, if we do our own work, there is a benefit for the ancestors on the other side, I believe. and I agree with Daniel completely on that point, that it's up to the ancestors to heal themselves and those ancestors going back to the beginning of all time. But just in doing our own inner work, our own exploration, coming to terms with, there's a whole lot of healing that happens for them, but most importantly for ourselves and the young people in our families.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nicole, something you said earlier tonight, I think is pretty spot on, and that is shame grows in secrecy. Shame grows in secrecy. Nicole, will you talk about that for a moment? What kind of shame are we talking about?
Well, I think, if you're looking at these hidden secrets within families or things, even what brought our ancestors here, if they were perhaps, being shunned or ostracized or ridiculed and escaping or fleeing or whatever those reasons may be, there's a lot of shame attached. And as we know, like at Ellis Island, as people came over, a lot of name changes were happening, and and if there's trauma in any sort, trauma that happens here in a family or in a person, with a person, there's a lot of shame that can be attached to that. Mm-hmm. And so, by this history of not talking about it, hiding things, covering up, pretending it didn't happen, that is just going to be a breeding ground for shame. Mm-hmm. So, as some of these things that are getting uncovered through, ancestry work, these secrets are being revealed, it's putting on the table a lot of things that had been growing in shame. And I think, we have a lot of people that are dealing with a disproportionate amount of shame in their life too. So, looking at this ancestral pattern and traumas and things, putting it all on the table, starting to talk about it, starting to deal with what creeps up, for those who are wanting it and emotionally prepared for it, and it brings ultimately this healing. Mm-hmm. So, the more we talk about something, the more that we can share that story with supportive people, the more that we're going to heal from it. So if we can look at it, for those that are wanting it and are willing to be like you both have been through your ancestry work of, I'll just deal with whatever comes up, I'll handle it. Mm-hmm. There's a tremendous amount of growth and healing that comes with it.
And yeah, exactly. Historic shame is something that I feel that can live on. And I know for my own self, with my adoptive mother, there was a shame with admitting, being Native American. Nobody from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan would dare admit that they were Native American, because that connotation was, well, then they're just drunken Indians.
Yeah.
And there's a pervasiveness of historic shame or genetic shame that goes on. And when we embrace those things, I feel that the shame turns into a sense of wellness and wholeness, and it goes on from there. But somebody always has to be the first person to begin looking. Cad, from a shaman's point of view, do you feel that our ancestors, who are now in the realm of the ancestors, do you think that they give us hints and signs along the way that perhaps poke and prod some of us toward finding the wisdom and the healing of our ancestors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's very likely as we start to develop relationships with them, that they would provide us clues. We oftentimes will talk about the signs that we see, or sometimes we aren't as aware that maybe it's a sign that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. We may just think it's something that just happened by happenstance. But I think as we develop better relationships with them and work on developing that relationship, that we become more aware of those things that they're pointing out to us that need healing, that we can be helpful to them with. So yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think that our ancestors who have gone before, our forefathers and our foremothers, are always dropping hints for those of us that are going to be the first bird at the feeder, so to speak, as John Davis says, to be the first one to open up that door and to take a peek inside a darkened corridor. I remember for many years in my lifetime having dreams, and in my dreams walking into a home, and in that it's always one particular home, and I would open up doors to certain bedrooms, and some of them I could only open a little way, others I could partially open the door, and others I could open the door kind of sort of, but the curtains were always closed. And after meeting my father's people in Georgia for the first time, I came home, and one of the very first dreams that I had, I found myself back in that home and walking up to one of the bedroom doors that I had seen 100 times in other dreams, and I was able to not only open the door all the way, but I opened it and the curtain was open and the window was open and there was a breath of air coming through. So I knew in that moment that my soul had been prepped for and had answered a call. And it was a call to awareness. And oftentimes I feel that we can focus on the historic traumas of our people, but I feel that the work the three of us are leading people to in our weekend retreats next year is, yes, acknowledging the trauma, but let's do that in order so that we can fully embrace the blessings and the gifts and the talents of our bloodline. Nicole, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that doing this part of the work is a lot about, the healing part, which, will involve understanding and the wisdom that comes with it, potentially that forgiveness piece. And so there are a lot of blessings that will come out of that for those who are in a place, of wanting to go down that route. Mm-hmm. Because, when we look at these historical traumas that happen in our family, these patterns that are happening, most of the time, if there's a trauma that happens, it's because someone was traumatized. So to deal with our own traumas, we also have to deal with our ancestors' traumas. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of conflicting emotions that exist within that can be difficult to emotionally withstand. So it's not for the faint of heart, but there's going to be a whole lot of healing that comes with it.
Well, even in the generations that currently exist, some of us have had the feeling that we need to do the suffering for our parents, or we need to carry on the suffering that they endured. And we may do it consciously or we may do it unconsciously, as to perpetuate whatever sorrow, sadness, drama, PTSD, whatever it happens to be, in our own being empathic and compassionate. Well, Mother suffered, and I'm going to continue to carry on that suffering. In her name, I will continue to suffer, or in Grandpa's name, I am going to continue to suffer. Rather than to break out and be all that my ancestors helped to create me to be. Cad, what are your thoughts about that? How we can continue to carry trauma?
Yeah, one of the interesting things as when you guys were just chatting, one of the things I think about is yes, we potentially carry those wounds or the traumas of our ancestors, but there's a lot of beauty that our ancestors also give us.
Yes.
That I think sometimes can not be maybe as acknowledged. We can kind of sometimes can focus a little bit too much on the woundedness. But I think of some of the women in my, not only my biological family, but my adoptive family, beautiful, strong women that just, were shining lights and had, they had some suffering, but they overcame it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think focusing not only on the gifts that they give us. Yes, we get wounds. We may get some of the healing, or we are aware of some of the woundedness. But I think we also need to focus on just some of the beautiful gifts that they are offering us as well. And some of that beauty is from the healing that occurs as a result of the woundedness. But there's also just some beautiful things that I think that we may not focus on as much because I think right now in our culture we're really focused on healing trauma, healing wounds, and not that that's a bad thing, but I think to kind of try and bring balance to that. So what beautiful things can my ancestors offer me, as well as how can I heal from that as well? So yeah.
One of the things that I find fascinating with my clients and the work that I do are the number of people who are talking to me about what's going on with DNA. I had one client whose brother had been a sperm donor. And, all those many years ago, of course, he was a sperm donor and his identity was to be kept, under lock and key. And now all of a sudden he's got well over 24 children that know exactly who he is. And they send him birthday cards and they send him Christmas cards. And his whole life has absolutely changed because of all of this. So it's quite fascinating. But one of the things other than that I think is so incredible in the way that our ancestors speak to us is that we can get so hung up. My Native American relatives talk about this whole blood quantum thing, that they're the only people identified by blood quantum. Well, what percentage are you of whatever? What percentage are you of... And that's true. I mean, sadly, that is a truth for them. Yes. But what I've found in my own life and in my practice are how many people have had an affinity toward a particular culture, have had an affinity toward a particular people. And they do the DNA testing and they find out maybe they have 3% or 6%. Or 10%, and they say to me, well, shouldn't I have more familiarity with the people that I'm 50% of? And I offer to them that all of our relatives, I believe, are sitting at a great big long Viking dining hall. And every one of them is valid. And just because maybe there are more Norwegians than there are Italians, doesn't mean that the Italians don't exist. And when I explain it that way, the light goes off, that sometimes we may have a quiet few in our blood and bones that are speaking the loudest because perhaps that's the bloodline that's asking you to consider the gifts and the talents that they bring beyond the grief, beyond the wounding. What are your thoughts about that, Nicole?
Yeah, I think just considering what maybe the gem within it all. And I'm thinking about me with I might have 1% of my French blood in me, but that part really speaks. So there are these hidden gifts within that, that, I am just thinking of how we all bring these unique gifts to the world and, just how that symbolically resonates with what our ancestral lineage may be and what resonates with us, and just because it's a smaller amount of something doesn't make it any less special or significant.
Thank you for that. As we're closing up at the top of the hour, I have posted both on the Facebook page for exploring ancestral wisdom and healing, both Nicole's website at easterndoorcounselingllc.com, and also Cad has given me permission to post with his photo, his email address, if you'd like to do some shamanic work, or perhaps you are in need of a death midwife. David is open for that, and of course Nicole is a licensed therapist. And I think you all kind of sort of know what it is that I do and how to get a hold of me. Cad, as we wrap up at the top of the hour, what are your last words for everyone?
I think just opening yourself up to the experience of introducing yourself to your ancestors and believing and knowing that they are around you every single day. And maybe in the next radio show that we have, one of the things we can do is just offer up a way that you can introduce yourself to the ancestors so that you can start to develop a relationship with them.
I love that. With that, everybody, you know what I'm going to say. Get out there and shine your light as only you can do it. Know that your ancestors walk with you. They walk through you. They are within you. And they love you. With that, everybody, until next month, blessings be. Good night, everyone. Good night, Cad. Good night, Nicole.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night. That was fun.
Yep.
Cheers.